What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with a special edition episode of You Got Boston live from Charlotte. I'll be in Charlotte over these next couple of days covering the Celtics back-to-back. They play the Hornets tomorrow and then again on Saturday. So we'll get two road games here. It's my first time here in Charlotte. And I figured I'd jump on just to talk a little bit about last night's first loss of the season to Indiana. Kind of what went wrong, what went right. If you caught the Garden Report last night, you heard some of my thoughts, but I figured I'd jump on here and just answer any questions that people might have. And then also, I really wanted to spend some time talking about Neemias Queta and just what we saw from him, because I do think that ultimately that is the most important thing that we learned in yesterday's game. And so I'll spend a little bit of time about the game, a little bit of time about Queta in particular, and kind of just what we saw from him and what I think we can come to expect from him and what the expectations are and what the ceiling is for him as a player, which I do think is quite high. And then we'll talk a little bit about, Charlotte coming up in these next few days here. The Celtics were supposed to have practice today and they canceled practice, which I was a little bit bummed about because it's always a good opportunity to talk to players on the road. But ultimately, this was an opportunity. It wasn't a huge surprise that they canceled just because of the fact that the game went into overtime. They were in Indiana last night, and so would have been a long trip to Charlotte right away, and then to have turn around and have practice the next day, and then you have back-to-back games. And so the reason I want to talk about Queta is because I do think he's going to get another opportunity here because we have a first back-to-back of the season, and Al Horford is he's definitely not going to play both games. He didn't last year. He's certainly not going to do it this year. And so no Porzingis, no Al on at least one of these two nights. Like there's going to be a bigger opportunity here for just the Celtics backup bigs to play. And so I think what we saw from Queta last night, like that's the big story. He was a plus 18 and 13 minutes off the bench, 9 rebounds, a block, a massive block, 2 points, 1 of 2 field goals. So it was just, to me, he was really the big reason why this game shifted and why the tide turned. And that's why Joe Mazzulla stayed with him, even when he was, when it had been the entire fourth quarter stretch. Now you're heading into overtime. Like they never really wavered from that group, minus just going offense defense with Sam Hauser. And so, yeah, I felt like it was really, it showed a sign of confidence, but it also really kind of spoke to the whole idea of stay ready, because the whole idea with Joe Mazzulla and the Celtics organization is they're always saying, the guys that are on the bench that aren't playing, they're staying ready. And this was the perfect epitome of that, because after playing 13 minutes in Washington, he came and didn't play at all in Detroit. And he had a good game in Washington too. He had 12 points in 13 minutes, 5 of 7 shooting, 7 rebounds. Like he stuffs the stat sheet when he plays. But then he didn't play in Detroit. He played a single minute in Milwaukee. So 2 consecutive games, he's out of the rotation. It's looking like it's going to be 3 consecutive games. And then here he goes, ends up being one of the most important players in a comeback that just fell short. Which in the scheme of things, I don't think it really matters that they lost that game yesterday. I think there's a lot you can take away from the fact that they were in position to come back, because ultimately, like, Siakam misses that 3 and Tatum hits that 3. Like, it doesn't really change things. So, that's kind of that's the reality here. But I felt like Queta was, showcase what it is that I think makes a lot of people really excited about him. And it's his ability to grab offensive rebounds. It's his activity level. He's just a disruptor. He looks like a nightmare for the opponent. Like nobody wants to deal with him, basically, is kind of how it appears. And so I think just watching him play and watching, there was kind of this lackluster energy from this team all night yesterday. And it came in spurts. Like Derek White had some good moments. Luke Cornett in the first half had some good moments. Tatum and Brown came alive at various moments. But for the most part, it was a team that was a step behind, and everybody spoke to that post game. Jayson Tatum spoke to that, Jaylen Brown, Joe Mazzulla. And so the fact that you can dig now and go to one of your last bench big spots, a guy that basically was headed to 3 DNPs in a row, and he is the turning point. I think it epitomizes the culture and everything that this team preaches and wants to be, and Queta really showed that yesterday. And I really do wish they had won so we could kind of put a nice bow on things and call this the Neemias Queta game, because, the story doesn't hit quite the same with a loss. But I think ultimately in the scheme of like what he's been able to accomplish this year and what we, in the trajectory of his career, like it doesn't really matter what happened, as far as the final score was concerned. And it was pretty remarkable that he was able to stay out there. and not really make any critical mistakes. And they kind of shifted their defensive coverage to play to his strengths, and it panned out. And so I'd love to know more about what Joe Mazzulla was thinking behind the scenes when he realized that Drew Holiday had not been playing. Drew not have Drew Holiday down the stretch is a pretty big move, even though I don't think he was playing great yesterday, and Pritchard was the hot hand. So I like the decision to go with the guys that got you back, but I'm curious what kind of conversations were taking place and kind of how he felt behind the scenes as well, because it's always I'm sure there's a lot of things that he was kind of juggling and considering there. So I'm going to start going through the chat here and acknowledging some of these questions and comments, and continue to feel free to put in comments, questions, whatever else, as always. And I'm going to continue doing these every couple of days, usually on off days, because on days where we have games, we do the Garden Report on CLNS Media, which you can subscribe to if you're not watching this on CLNS, and you can hear some of my kind of takeaways and analysis there. So I'm going to start at the top, comment here on the Kornet-Tillman lineups. I just want to acknowledge the fact that Kornet and Tillman lineups have been statistically quite bad so far. I think everybody has seen that with the eye test. I think the advanced numbers show that as well. And at this point in the season, we've seen 5 games. Like part of the thinking and part of the plan is trying out different things and kind of seeing what lands. And ultimately, I think that this was one of those things where I don't know that we're going to see much more of the Kornet-Tillman combo. Like, I think you're just giving up a lot on both ends, or at least more than you need to. I've liked it better when they've gone with a single bench big and Jordan Walsh, for example, than 2 bench bigs. And I think the numbers back that up as well. And it just from a comfortability standpoint, like you could just see it doesn't throw people off at all. So I don't think we're going to see them that much. I know people haven't been happy with them. I was joking yesterday on the Garden Report, but literally like people that I have not spoken to in months were texting me about how much they do not enjoy those minutes. So it's clear that it's how the fan base feels. That being said, I think early on, the value of seeing things and trying things on the court versus, not experimenting and just going with the things that work in the playoffs. Like I would say, try everything, and even if you even if you finish with the second seed because of it, like it's probably worthwhile. This isn't a team that struggles on the road, so obviously you want to win as many games as possible, and we know that Joe Mazzulla is that's his mindset, and that's how these players are thinking as well. But I think from a schematic standpoint, like there was an element of like let's just try stuff yesterday that I did like, and that I've just liked throughout the season. Like they could just go with no Jordan, but they're going with Jordan, so stuff like that. And thank you, Tom, for continuing to tune in. I'm starting to recognize some familiar names, which is always fun. It was such a crazy game, and to be honest with you, yesterday was my first time doing the post-game show after a loss, and I was thinking to myself, like, oh, this is going to be so kind of demoralizing to just talk about, like, everybody played bad. And yes, it was still a loss, but it did give us – it was a completely different tone to our post-game show, because I think that there was actually a lot to think about and break down and consider around, like, what went well, what didn't go well, who was key in the comeback. Derek White was huge. I mean, and when going 8 for 9 from the field, 5 of 5 from 3, did so much of the damage in the fourth quarter and overtime. So, like, there were some good things to consider, certainly, as well. So yeah, it was fascinating. I think that in a sense they hadn't played great in a couple of games. Like Detroit was not a great consistent effort. Milwaukee, I think you saw good moments, but there was also the first half which they weren't quite themselves. And so sometimes a loss can be good, I think, from a mindset standpoint, because it just wakes you up and realizes, like, okay, the bad habits that you're getting away from, like they're inescapable. You have to actually change those things. You're not going to always be able to plot a win. And so I think there's something to be said about, like, sometimes it's good to lose in a way. Although I don't want to, obviously you're always going for the win. So I'm going to talk Charlotte. I see there's a question here about Charlotte and just kind of what we're anticipating there. These are just comments while I was talking about Queta, but I do think, like, the, part of why Queta was successful yesterday is because the Pacers were shorthanded and they were largely relying on a small ball lineup. And that's why, even Luke was able to exploit that. So I don't know that it's transferable to every single matchup. And in fact, we know it's not. We know that he's going to struggle at times versus different coverages and things. But I guess my point would be is I would love to see him. Focus, be thrown out there in these environments and be thrown out here in these different moments where, like, maybe it's going to cost them a little bit, and probably it's not, but maybe it is. And give me a Queta guarding Joel Embiid for 5 minutes. Like, let's just see what happens. I think that he has played so few NBA minutes, in totality compared to a guy like Luke Cornett and compared to most of these bench bigs that we're talking about. So, Queta, I think that the only way he's going to be able to kind of iron out some of the things that he struggles with is by actually being on the floor. So that's my thinking. Last night was a great opportunity for him to play really high stakes minutes. And this comment here by Steve, like this is absolutely what I think when I watch him. Like he just has fire and passion. And there's just this energy about him that it's really fun to watch. At least I think that you're talking about Queta here. Maybe I'm wrong, but regardless, I stand by that. I think that he's totally resonate with this too. He's an energy high motor player. And you just versus younger, faster teams, like those are, teams that sometimes the Celtics have struggled with. Like I do think that he can give them another dimension that at least from like a game planning standpoint, like just makes things a little bit more challenging to go up against Boston. So it is hard because I think that like people get low on Luke in those moments because all of a sudden Queta is really explosive and there's things that he does really well that Luke doesn't do as well. And so I think it becomes this like Queta Luke thing. And I don't think it needs to be a Queta Luke thing personally. Like they're both important to this team. They both played important minutes yesterday. There's actually space for both of them to get minutes, and there's going to be matchups where one is preferable over the other. And so I think there's like this natural desire, among the fans, among the media to say like Luke versus Queta. And I actually don't think that it needs to be like that because there's the space where maybe Al's playing fewer minutes, really preserve his legs. Porzingis is still a little bit of a ways away from coming back. Tillman has struggled a little bit here in these early days, although, all of these are small sample sizes. So you don't want to run with any of these assumptions right now. But I think that when you watch Queta, you remember why they were high on him, why they took his two-way and made it a full guaranteed deal last year, and then ultimately why they brought him back for a multi-year deal. Like there's a reason that for all of those things. And thank you so much, Nate, for the contribution. Happy Halloween. I totally forgot it was Halloween. I was just walking around. Charlotte trying to grab some food, and people were in costumes, and I was like, why? And then I realized that that's the one thing about covering an NBA team, is that your schedule starts to not be like a normal person schedule that is based off of like weekdays and weekends and holidays, and it's more just like when are the Celtics playing, and when are the WNBA games. So I forgot, but I appreciate that. Let's talk Drew Holiday. I got a couple questions here about Drew. Drew wasn't playing good. I'm sure he understands. I definitely don't think Drew has an issue with being benched. I think that he is one of the lowest ego guys on the team and probably in the NBA considering his talent level. And then question here from Nelson, what have you thought about Drew's start to the season? So the thing with Drew is that I felt like last night he was uncharacteristically like a little bit out of it. Like he made some plays on both ends defensively, just like backdoor cuts, things that you're just not used to seeing. I've rewatched most of last night's game, not the full thing in its entirety because I had to fly here this morning and had other work to do. But I rewatched most of the game, and yeah, as I rewatched it, I kind of realized like, okay, there were some plays here that just don't look like Drew Holiday level plays. I don't think that that's been consistent throughout these last few games. Like I actually think that he's had a pretty solid start to the season. And so I guess to answer that question, Nelson, like I haven't really thought too much about Drew's start. It hasn't caught my attention in the way that like Derek White's have, where Derek White feels like he's taken almost another leap. Peyton Pritchard feels like he's taken another leap. Jaylen Brown has had like some moments of struggle and some highs. Tatum the same. Drew's just kind of been in the background a little bit, and I think that's completely fine for who he is at this point in his career. And after seeing him in the playoffs last year, I feel like everybody should have confidence in what he can do on both ends when the pressure is high. But certainly, I think like once there's 10 games, I feel like you can start to draw conclusions or at least talk at, these guys that we have a really large sample with their careers. Like I can't even talk about like Tatum's shot after 2 or 3 games because it's just like you have no idea. I can't talk about Jaylen Brown and like how he's looking this year, after 2 or 3 games, just because we've seen these guys play hundreds and hundreds of games. So I'm more comfortable like jumping on, these guys that we don't get to see very often, like Jordan Walsh and Neemias Queta, because this is like all we know. But yeah, it wasn't a huge surprise when I rewatched why Drew Holiday did not check back in. I kind of thought in lifetime, okay, this is because this is the group that brought them back and they wanted to make sure that they stuck with that group and rewarded them. And then when I rewatched, I was like, okay, this group actually just like was playing a lot better. And Pritchard actually just had a better game last night. He was just seeming more locked in, and that's life, and that happens. I think Drew will bounce back well here. It'll be fun to see him with Charles Lee. Charles Lee was the system that he was probably the closest to, or at least he appeared to be. A lot of times last year, they would get their shoot around together. Charles Lee was in Milwaukee with Drew as well. And so he was one of the first guys that we kind of asked when Charles got the job, and he said, I'm obviously really happy for him and everything, but it'll be cool to see those two guys get reunited tomorrow. I'm sure they're spending some time together, maybe this weekend even, or this, I'm sure they'll see each other kind of off the floor. So, and yeah, this is Tom just reiterating what I was thinking. Pritchard played so well all game yesterday. I do feel like part of the Drew thing was just like Pritchard was playing really well. And I noticed the offense, he had 15 points, and this has like been such a good stretch of offense for him. 19 points, 28 points, 15 points. Like if he's kind of showcasing what I've long believed. Like if you give this guy an opportunity, he's going to show you that he's capable of putting up numbers and putting up like lead guard numbers. And I know it's a controversial opinion a little bit still, but I do think that ultimately like Pritchard is somebody that, give him the chance to close out this game yesterday. He doesn't get as many chances as other guys. He doesn't have the same leeway as other guys. And yesterday he was one of the best two guards in the game. And what stood out to me on the rewatch was defensively, he made some big plays defensively, and he was actually really bothering Tyrese Halliburton and whoever else he was switched onto. And so he actually wasn't a liability. Sure, obviously Drew can do things that Pritchard can't. That's always going to be the case defensively with just a size limitation. But was really impressed by what I saw from him. And I was really hoping we'd have practice today so we could talk to Joe about kind of his thoughts on Pritchard's game and what some of the considerations were. And I feel this comment here, Drew should have finished. He was bad the other day and clutched at the end. I totally understand that piece. And I think there's a certain school of thought of like, let's just put the stars in at the end. We're kind of regardless because they're the stars and they're the guys that, you can count on. But I think in this kind of game, this is a regular season game. It was a very unconventional comeback. Like it was Tatum in the bench really that ignited that. Queta, who hadn't played the whole game. Like I kind of liked what Joe did. And I liked the fact that Pritchard just got to ride it out. And I think if they win, it's an obvious call. And when you lose, you think like maybe they could have benefited from Drew there and guarding the last few possessions. Like, obviously there's something that he has there that, you can't make up for. So yeah, but it's an interesting predicament, dilemma. I'm always fascinated by the substitution patterns because there's so many different ways that these things can go. And ultimately Joe kind of stuck to the group that brought them back. I mean, they were down by 21 at one point. So it was a pretty excessive deficit and it just looked kind of lifeless. Like at one point they were down by like, I think 17 in the fourth. And I was thinking to myself, like, just end the misery. Like they just looked so tired and so out of it. And it looked like they had just finished a long road trip. It was kind of surprising just how early in the season it was. And Jaylen Brown said post game, like, I didn't have my legs under me. I didn't have a burst all game. And I thought that was interesting because it is early in the season. It's not like a long-term fatigue thing, but he said, sometimes it just happens and it's a long season of ups and downs. And so you see that go up and down and all of those things. So yeah. And I'm just going to quick message from our friends over at Prize Picks, and then we'll go back and talk a little bit more about some of the takeaways here. Prize Picks is the best way to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You can just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. You can now win 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play. So even if one of your players gets injured, if your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. Prize Picks also invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinion into real money all season long on Prize Picks. I'll be looking to make some picks ahead of NBA opening night next week. In the meantime, download your app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So I see some questions here about Tatum. I think that Tatum is always going to kind of dominate the conversation just because he is ultimately, he's the guy. He's the guy that I think probably dominates the headlines more than anybody else, or maybe Jaylen too. I felt in general that Tatum has actually looked really good this season. I know the 3-point numbers are back down to approximately what they were last year. Let's see, actually. Let me see if my computer can pull these up without crashing. So right now he's averaging 30.2 points per game, 7 rebounds, 5.2 assists. He's shooting 48.6% from the field. And from three, he's now at 37.7%. So that's literally exactly what he was last year. Last year, he was 37.6%. So all those numbers are pretty comparable. A couple more shot attempts, a couple more points, slight increases in assists, slight decrease in rebounds. So he looked pretty similar. What I liked yesterday was everything that like we saw from this game. Even when he was struggling and when he was off, like he didn't pack it in. He didn't say, this is just not our night. He was a big part of that comeback. As with everybody that was on the floor, it kind of requires a full team effort in those moments. But I think that it showed a certain level of level-headedness, of maturity. And, there were some snippets that were caught, they were mic'd up, I think, on ESPN, of the guys just being like, listen, we're the best team in the league. There's plenty of time left. Like, we can make this happen. And you could just tell that there was a cool about him and about other players as well, that is just encouraging to see. And so generally speaking, like no major takeaways from Tatum's individual performance through 5 games that's that different from what we've seen in the past. I think the people that were worried that he was going to come in and he forgot how to shoot, like that didn't happen. Obviously, he's at the same rate that he was last year. But the 8 of 12 start in opening night, like that was not going to be sustainable. And it's not sustainable because that's not a normal shooting pattern. Or maybe it was 8 for 11. I can't even remember now. But yeah, I think that's the one thing I'll say is like the Tatum 3-point shot is still a little bit of a question mark. It's a little bit of an X factor. In the sense of like, is it actually much better than it was in previous years? He's the 37.5% career 3-point shooter. That's a big sample size at this point. He has been in the league for 8 years? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is year 8. So like we don't really need to be worried about can he shoot. I think that people were starting to get excited about like, is he going to suddenly be a 40% 3-point shooter again? I don't think so. I mean, the thing that stands out right now is that he's averaging 12.2 attempts per game. His career average is 6.8. So this is a substantial jump from previous seasons. I don't think it's going to maintain. I mean, he took 18 threes last night. But other than that, like I felt like he has been pretty attacking the rim. He took a lot of free throws yesterday. He seemed pretty engaged. I really liked his passing when he's kind of gone past first. So I think he looks very dominant. He looks like he is going to be starting the season again, kind of in the MVP conversation, and he probably won't get it, but yeah, kind of what we've come to expect from him these last few seasons. I feel like he gets off to these better starts than maybe he was earlier in his career. But yeah, I'm curious. You guys can feel free to put in the chat what you guys have been thinking about his performance so far. I've seen the Jalen concerns. I know everybody's freaking out about Jalen. I would love to stress for people, like if you're really freaking out about Jalen, like at least, he just won finals MVP like 3 months ago. Like I feel like he deserves a little bit of leeway here to have a couple of tough nights. I think he owned up to these last few games that just he wasn't up to standard. And especially yesterday, you should check out his post game. If you haven't, he really took accountability for a lot of the things that went wrong and the energy and that he didn't have bursts and things. And I think I don't extrapolate anything more than just a couple of tough nights for him. But yeah, Tatum was a big part of the comeback. Jalen made some big plays too. He had a big steal down the stretch. And then the one thing I'll say here is, Philippe, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, comment here, but Porzingis will level up the team in December. It's very possible that Porzingis is actually closer to coming back than we may have realized. I think that from the beginning, Brad Stevens, Joe Mazzulla, Porzingis himself were pretty conservative with just talking about his minutes and when he might come back. And the reality is that Shams has reported that he's pretty close, is that it might be, it could be Christmas, it could be sooner even, which again, it's November tomorrow. So we're talking really soon here. And then obviously like second to that, there's this whole idea of, we've been watching him warm up and he's been moving really well. And he's been doing those kinds of like shooting drills for weeks now. So it's not like he just got cleared to do that. So I would not be surprised if now that, he ends up coming back sooner rather than later. And I think they're going to put him on a very restrictive plan. But yeah, we'll see. He's going to make them a lot better. I feel like even I forget sometimes how much of a better team this is when Porzingis is on the roster, because just from a rim protection standpoint, he was so efficient offensively last year. He bailed them out so many close games where he was just able to draw fouls. He was able to just get easy baskets shooting over people. I think we're going to get the same guy back that we've seen in the past. He's come back from so many injuries. So I feel like when you're somebody who knows you can come back from injuries, you've come back from injuries before, it gives you this sense of like almost confidence in yourself that maybe somebody that has never suffered a serious injury wouldn't have. So we'll see. Tom question up here about, should we split Kornet and Queta minutes based on matchups? It seems like Kornet is great against slower paced teams, but Queta was okay dealing with Indy's fast pace. I think that's kind of what it ends up being a lot of times. So I don't think that, that's anything completely new. But I think that maybe sometimes people get frustrated because they want a certain player out there just because that's what they want to see. And if you're not thinking about who are the opponents that are out there, I'm going to start keeping track of when each of them are playing and who the matchups are, because I think that there is exactly as you laid out, like the more physical, faster paced teams tend to bring Queta out. So we'll see how it plays out. I also just think that Queta right now, he's higher risk, high reward. And so it's a certain mindset of playing him more minutes. Like if he's playing more minutes, he's going to make more mistakes, but he also might get a spectacular block that Luke's just not going to get. And so you have to kind of think about how much risk you want at this point. And maybe in a playoff game, you're going to take the lower risk, lower reward option, but maybe in November against the Hornets, you do the reverse. So we'll see. I think that Celtics fans, though, should be grateful that we have both of these guys on the roster, because ultimately, like, these are both players that are good backup bigs. Like, they really are. And I know that they're not perfect. If they were perfect, they wouldn't be minimum players. But there's still a lot of good things that they're doing, and ways that they've contributed to this team, and that they're 4-1. So they're 4-1, and Al's limited his minutes, and Porzingis has not been in the lineup. Yeah, and I see Tatum's shot seems better. I think the mechanics has looked better to people. I really try to steer clear of mechanics as much as possible, unless it's super, super obvious to me, just because I think that it can become a little confirmation bias. I saw Mikal Bridges his true shooting percentage right now is 62%. So for all the discussions around how ugly his shots looked, he's been pretty much normal. So yeah, it's pretty funny just to see how, like, sometimes the eye test doesn't always match up with the analytics. I thought that as Haydens was kind of getting more tired yesterday, his shot was looking a little bit wonkier. But the big thing is the hitch, and the hitch is mostly gone. I haven't seen many flashes of the hitch since the season. So we're just going to have a quick message from our friends over at Game Time, and then we'll talk other teams and just kind of who other threats might be right now. Again, very early on, but just, at this point in the season.
There's few things I prefer doing than attending an NBA game or sporting event live, and you can purchase tickets to Celtics games or any other sporting event, concert, or show with Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. With Game Time, you can actually see the view of the court or stage from the seat that you choose to purchase, and you can buy tickets with just one click. There are lots of cool features. There's lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, or theater. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
Awesome. So I've been catching a bunch of these games. I try to watch as much as possible. I will say it's never been, I'm never able to catch everything, but I think so far OKC's looked really good. And Cleveland's looked really good. They're obviously the two undefeated teams. But I think, it's just hard. I always feel like there's like the fluky teams that look really good at the beginning of the season, and you look at the standings and it's like, when were the Pelicans in first place? But they were for a while, So, Cleveland, I think it's a small sample. They haven't had too many difficult battles just yet, but they looked good yesterday. They've looked good through 5 games. OKC is the team that I was the highest on coming into the season, and they have totally matched my expectations of kind of what we saw. And that's without Hardenstein, who I think remains one of the most underrated players in the league. So just thinking Eastern Conference, I will say, like, Pacers were not the number one team that I was listing as a threat to Boston. And I think in general, people are sleeping on the Pacers just because they didn't have like a bunch of splashy signings. They're in a smaller market. But ultimately, they were the number 2 team in the East last year. They were in the Eastern Conference Finals. And so they deserve a little bit more respect. They've always played the Celtics well. Last year, they beat them twice during the regular season. They were one of just 2 teams that beat the Celtics twice last year, the Nuggets being the other. And then again, last night, like regardless of how low energy in the Celtics, all that, like there was a reason why they got ahead by so much. And sometimes it takes another team forcing you to be low energy and best up behind. So I think Indiana is a team that I know I've been tuning into them. Halliburton hasn't played like himself yet. And if that happens and everything else kind of continues to materialize, Siakam, I thought, Nembhard really didn't even play yesterday, and he has been huge against Boston at points. And so they're a team that I'm just going to like put a little bit more respect on their names. I think that at the same time, I would be very surprised if they beat the Celtics in a 7-game series, but I think that if they face off again, it wouldn't be a sweep because it really shouldn't have been a sweep last year. And Joe's mentioned that we all felt that way being in Indiana. Every one of these games was crazy. And I also just love watching Indiana play. Like, I think they're just a fun basketball team to watch. They make the most of the talent that they have. They play basketball in a way that just makes sense. Like, they're getting easy baskets. They have constant cuts, constant passing. It's like they're making it as easy as possible. Sometimes you watch these talented NBA teams and you're like, what is running? What are they running right now? It feels like they're not capitalizing on all the talent they have on the court. And so Indiana gets a bump for me. OKC stays probably number 1 as a threat to Boston. I just think that they might be a year away. Like, they might still be a little bit too inexperienced and too young, but I don't know. I feel like between SGA being older than people think and the fact that they now have Alex Caruso, who's obviously won it all, and he's a great defender. So we'll see. We'll see about that and about whether they need more time. But I'm a fan of OKC. I'm a fan of kind of what they have going on over there. I think the way that they've kind of built this team through the draft has been pretty cool. And then this past offseason I thought was really shrewd. So yeah, we'll see. And then I resonate with this comment here. I think the Cavs have shown flashes, and they did last year as well. And again, it was weird because last year we never saw the full strength Cavs, with Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell all together. And so they are one of the many teams that were not at full strength last season the Celtics faced in the postseason. I'm going to need a bigger sample from Cleveland before I can get excited about them. 5-0 starts great. They've looked good in the games they've played so far. But do they have enough offense? Do they have like can those bigs, can Jarrett Allen be like a dominant guy who actually squares up with another really good NBA All-Star, post player and do what he's been doing these first few games? I don't know. I'm not saying I don't believe in them, but I just think we need a little bit more sample. So we'll get back to them. I'm going to be out in Cleveland in November to catch the Celtics in Cleveland. So I'll have some updates from on the ground there. I'm trying to go to as many of these road games as possible, just to give you guys a perspective of kind of what I'm hearing and seeing on the ground. Nothing much yet. I only got here today, but I'll be here all weekend. So feel free to message me if you have questions, things you want to see. I'll be posting videos and things from on the ground, from Charles Lee, from players talking to one another and all that. I did see that we got Boston banner that the Pacers hung. I thought that was pretty funny. I was going to quote tweet it, and then I think I asked around, and it sounds like they do that for every single game. But it is pretty funny because I always hear the expression of like, winning, like, beating the Celtics was your championship. So to actually see like the banner rise, like, I don't know if that was post game, pre game, whatever it was. If anybody has context on that, I'm curious. But it was pretty funny to see because I felt like it was like a meme manifested. But my biggest takeaway from yesterday was just this team has fight. This team has players on the bench that are ready to go. It just shows you good organizational culture. And Indiana is really good, and Indiana is a tough matchup for any of these teams to play against. And certainly they've put up a hell of a fight against Boston this last year, between the in-season tournament, between every one of those conference finals games that came down to a coin flip, it felt like. And then obviously starting with a win here, first loss of the season for the Celtics. So I'll wrap it up here. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please subscribe on Spotify, Apple, whatever it is you watch your podcasts on, YouTube. Tell a friend, leave a comment, leave a like, leave a review, whatever it is. All the support helps as I can kind of continue to get this off the ground. But it's been so fun to just be able to go live from different places and answer your questions. And I'll have a lot more coming up over these next few days. We'll have the Garden Report post-game tomorrow. And we'll have more coming up in the next few days. And if there's questions that I didn't get to, feel free to leave them on the YouTube in the comments, and then I can answer them in the comments as well. But thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your night. Happy Halloween, and I will see you all tomorrow.